My name's Heath Martin. I'm a town planner with Toowoomba Regional Council. My role with council involves overseeing the delivery of the new town plan for council, how the new town plan will deal with bushfire risk. We started developing the new town plan in about September last year, and it'll be in place around the second half of 2024. So the plan is very broad-ranging and deals with a lot of things about where development will be located in the future, the type of development we want to see in different locations, and the form that will take. It deals with issues like natural hazards, so we look at flooding, bushfire and landslide. The council has just completed a major review of flood risks within the region, and we're now turning our attention to bushfire and landslide to make sure we've got all three risks covered in the new town plan. The focus on bushfire is on bushfire across the whole region. So we're building on work that's been done by the Queensland Government and the CSIRO in identifying where bushfire prone areas are. And our work is to assess the risk in those areas to understand are people more likely to be at danger within some parts of the region rather than others. Escarpment is definitely a vulnerable area within the region because bushfire affected by topography and vegetation. Those aspects pose a particular risk within the escarpment, so we need to be very mindful. And given that the escarpment is so close to an area of major population, being Toowoomba City, it's an area of greater risk. When we're assessing risk, we start with the areas that are known to be subject to bushfire, and then we look at the characteristics of those areas, and those characteristics relate to the vulnerability of those areas, so who are living in those areas, and are there any vulnerable characteristics? Are they elderly? Are there people who may be more at risk within a bushfire situation, find it harder to get out of the area? We look at the type of land uses which are in those areas. Are the people who are going to those areas potentially subject to risk? So are there childcare centres, aged care facilities where the people are more at risk? We then also look at characteristics of frequency of the fire. So we look at fire history, and is an area known to have frequent fires, and therefore the likelihood of there being fires in the future is much higher. And we also look at the nature of the vegetation within those areas and the slope. So we know that fire speed increases with slope up the hill, and so areas which are steeper have greater vulnerability and are at risk. So we have a look at all of those characteristics to determine what is the overall level of risk within that area. Not surprisingly, our assessment has identified that those areas that are more densely vegetated and are hillier, such as the escarpment, the Ravensbourne area, and to a lesser extent the forested areas to the west of Millmerran, are the areas of greater risk within the region. Primary outcome that we're looking to make sure is that people and property are protected in relation to future development. So we're not necessarily looking at the existing risks and protecting existing development, but it's more about future development. This information will inform council's disaster management work, so working with vulnerable communities and identifying the particular communities we should be focusing on in the future. But the primary focus is about making sure that future development doesn't put people and property at risk. The work we're doing will look at all communities. However, because development isn't happening across the whole region, I guess the impact of this work will be less in those areas where development is lesser. So for instance, Hampton is an area where obviously a lot of vegetation around Hampton, so there is a fire risk within that community, but there's not a lot of development happening, so the impact of this on future development in Hampton will be quite less. Whereas in Toowoomba, we're seeing a lot of development, and so there'll be greater impact on the Toowoomba community. Part of the work that we're doing at the moment is planning for how future population growth will be accommodated, where new houses and industry businesses will be built in the future. And so this will help us understand the areas that we maybe should be avoiding development in the future because there are those risks in place. One of the things about bushfire is because it goes hand in hand with vegetation, the risk can be reduced by eliminating the vegetation. However, the vegetation has some values of its own, and we don't want to see areas cleared just to reduce bushfire risk. We want to preserve the values because our trees are an important part of our region, and so we would rather direct development into other areas rather than try to remove the risk by reducing vegetation. So the work that we're doing started off with the hazard identification by the state government. We're doing that risk assessment at the moment, and once we've identified where all the risks are in the areas of highest risk, we will then look at what controls do we need to put in place to regulate future development to make sure that those risks are appropriately considered and addressed. That may involve changing the zoning of land in some areas. The current zoning may support types of development that are inappropriate within a bushfire risk area, so we might make some changes there, and then in the future when somebody makes an application to do development within a bushfire risk area, there'll be some clear requirements that they will need to address to make sure that they are reducing the risk to a tolerable level. So we want to make sure, as I said, that people and property are not placed at risk by new development. So that might mean that things like childcare centres, aged care facilities aren't supported within bushfire risk areas. Other development, such as housing, may be okay to occur as long as buildings are designed and sited in a particular way. So yes, these will affect future decisions that council makes around development applications. Yes, we'll certainly be making people who are within identified bushfire-prone areas aware that that's been identified and seeking their input into how development will be regulated within those areas. The best way for people to be kept informed is if they go onto Council's website and register Toowoomba Region Futures project, and then they'll be kept informed of opportunities to have a comment. But we'll be using various mechanisms to make sure people are aware when the time comes and have the chance to have their say.